September 19th, 1977, 6 o'clock in the morning. A steelworker, well, nobody wrote down his name, drove his pickup truck to the Campbell Works gate on the south side of Youngstown, Ohio. Same route his father drove, same route his grandfather drove. The gate was locked. A security guard told him the plant was closed. Not for the day. Forever. 5,000 men showed up for work that morning. Every single one of them was turned away. No warning, no severance meeting, no letter in the mail the week before. The Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company, the largest employer in the state of Ohio, simply stopped existing between Friday afternoon and Monday morning. Within 5 years, 50,000 jobs would vanish from the Mahoning Valley. The population would collapse from 170,000 to under 80,000. And the sky, leaden and orange for half a century from furnace glow, would turn an almost painful blue. But that was only the first time Youngstown died. What followed was stranger, darker, and more American than any steel mill story you've heard. Because when the industry left, something else moved in. And when that was finally rooted out, the city tried something no American city had ever attempted it, planned its own shrinkage, accepted its own decline, and bet its future on a word no politician in this country had ever said out loud. We are a smaller city. 3 times, Youngstown was destroyed. By corporations, by criminals, by hope itself. This is the story of the city that refused to stay dead. But to understand how a city dies 3 times, you have to understand what made it worth killing in the first place. Chapter 1. The Forge. Youngstown wasn't supposed to become what it became. When John Young bought 15,000 acres along the Mahoning River in 1796, he paid about $1 an acre. He was thinking, farmland. The river had other ideas. Beneath the soil of northeastern Ohio sat 2 things that would change American history: seams of block coal that could feed an iron furnace without conversion, and deposits of iron ore rich enough to smell from the surface. By 1803, the Heaton brothers had built the valley's first blast furnace. By 1850, Youngstown was producing more iron than most European cities. But iron was the prologue. Steel was the story. At the turn of the 20th century, local industrialists made the leap from iron to steel, and Youngstown exploded. The Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company, founded in 1900 by George Wick and James Campbell, with $600,000 in capital, would grow into the 5th largest steelmaker in America. They didn't just build a company, they built a civilization. Sheet and Tube's Campbell Works stretched along the Mahoning River like a small country: blast furnaces, open hearth furnaces, blooming mills, tube mills, seamless pipe facilities. At peak, the plant employed 27,000 people, and the people came from everywhere. Poles, Greeks, Italians, Slovaks, Croatians, Hungarians, African Americans from the South, drawn by the same gravitational pull that made every steel town in America a miniature United Nations. The company built their houses, literally. After a violent strike in 1916, burned half the business district of East Youngstown, a riot so destructive that the National Guard was called in. Sheet and Tube created the Buckeye Land Company as a subsidiary. They built worker housing out of precast concrete slabs, organized by ethnicity. White immigrants in one section, African American workers in another, with a separate entrance and front porches, moved to the rear to reduce their visibility from the street. The company wasn't being generous. It was being strategic. Workers who lived in company houses, who shopped at company stores, who sent their children to company-funded schools, those workers didn't organize. Those workers didn't strike again. East Youngstown was even renamed Campbell, after the company president, as if the riot had erased the town's original identity entirely. That's the first thing you need to understand about Youngstown. The steel industry didn't just employ the city, it owned the city. Every street, Every church, every Friday paycheck, every Sunday dinner, all of it flowed from the furnaces. The smoke that turned the sky orange wasn't pollution to the people who lived under it. It was the color of money. And when the furnaces went dark, there was nothing underneath. But first, there was a war to win, and Youngstown Steel would help win it. Chapter 2. Glory and Betrayal. World War II was Youngstown's finest hour. The Mahoning Valley's mills ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Youngstown Sheet and Tube alone became the largest employer in the state of Ohio. The steel that poured from these furnaces became tank armor, artillery shells, ship plating, aircraft components. The 1944 government documentary Steel Town captured Youngstown at its zenith. Workers proud, furnaces blazing, an entire American city functioning as a single organism devoted to production. The narrator called it a city that works. After the war, demand remained strong. The post-war building boom needed steel for highways, bridges, skyscrapers, automobiles. Through the 1950s and into the 1960s, Youngstown hummed. Workers bought homes. Their kids went to college. Mill Creek Park, over 2,600 acres of gorges, waterfalls, and forested hillsides, established in 1891, gave families a place to breathe between shifts. But behind the furnace glow, something was changing. American steel companies, including Youngstown Sheet and Tube, had not modernized. While Japanese and German steelmakers, rebuilt from rubble with American money, installed basic oxygen furnaces and continuous casting technology, Youngstown's mills still ran open hearth furnaces designed in the 1920s. The equipment that won World War II was now 30 years obsolete. In 1969, the Lykes Corporation, a New Orleans shipping conglomerate with no steelmaking experience, acquired Youngstown Sheet and Tube. The purchase was financed largely with the steel company's own assets. Lykes stripped maintenance budgets, deferred capital investments, and extracted profits while the physical plant deteriorated. The workers could see it happening. Furnace linings that should have been replaced were patched. Equipment that broke down was jury-rigged rather than replaced. Maintenance crews shrank while production quotas didn't. The men who poured steel every day knew the math before the accountants did. And then came September 19th, 1977. Chapter 3. Black Monday. The announcement came without warning. Youngstown Sheet and Tube's Campbell Works, the plant that had defined the city for 77 years, was closing immediately. 5,000 workers terminated. No transition plan. No retraining program. No apology. A steel worker's wife told a reporter. He came home at 7 in the morning. I thought someone had died. Someone had. The city. Within 2 years, it got worse. In 1979, U.S. Steel pulled out of the Youngstown area. Republic Steel followed into bankruptcy. By 1982, 50,000 jobs had vanished from the Mahoning Valley. The entire economic foundation of a metropolitan area erased in 5 years. Father Ed Noga, a local priest, watched the demolition of one of the oldest blast furnaces in the valley, the Jeanette Furnace at Briar Hill, immortalized later in a Bruce Springsteen song. He described what he saw. I saw these hard men, shot in a beer guise, standing there crying. What happened next was unprecedented in American labor history. A coalition of religious leaders, steel workers, and activists, led by figures like attorney Stoughton Lind, launched a campaign to buy the Campbell Works and reopen it as a worker community-owned enterprise. The Ecumenical Coalition of the Mahoning Valley raised money, drafted business plans, and petitioned the Carter administration for federal loan guarantees. The answer was no. The federal government decided that saving Youngstown's steel industry was not economically viable. The decision wasn't wrong in a narrow financial sense. But it was a signal, perhaps the first clear signal in the American Rust Belt, that the social contract between corporations, workers, and communities was over. The companies had taken the iron from the ground, the labor from the immigrants, the best years from 3 generations of workers, and when the math changed, they walked away. Not slowly. Not with regret. Between a Friday and a Monday, once I made you rich enough to forget my name. Bruce Springsteen wrote that about Youngstown. He'd driven through and seen what was left. But the worst part of Youngstown's story isn't that the steel industry left. It's what moved into the vacuum. Chapter 4. Crimetown, U.S.A. Here's the thing about Youngstown that the steel documentaries leave out. The mob didn't arrive after the mills closed. The mob was there the whole time. Steel towns had a specific economic ecosystem that organized crime understood perfectly. Tens of thousands of well-paid men working brutal shifts. Men who, when the bell rang, wanted 3 things: a drink, a bet, and someone who'd extend credit for both. By the 1940s, Youngstown's streets were lined with after-hours joints. Workers played barboo, a Turkish dice game, while capos in white-brimmed hats ran the numbers racket locals called the Bug. The gambling was lucrative enough that 2 major crime families fought over it. Youngstown sat precisely between Pittsburgh and Cleveland. Both families wanted it. Neither could claim it outright. For decades, the Mahoning Valley was a contested borderland, a kind of organized crime demilitarized zone where shifting alliances produced periodic explosions of violence. The Saturday Evening Post called it Crimetown, U.S.A. Car bombings became so common that locals developed a dark familiarity with them. Between the 1950s and the 1990s, the Mahoning Valley averaged roughly 1 mob-related bombing or shooting every few months. The explosions were precise, professional, meant to intimidate more than to kill, though they often did both. But here's what made Youngstown different from Chicago, or Detroit, or Buffalo. In those larger cities, the professional classes eventually pushed back against organized crime. Prosecutors, journalists, civic leaders created enough countervailing pressure to break the mob's grip. In Youngstown, the professional classes left when the steel left. The lawyers, the doctors, the business owners, the people who might have formed the civic backbone of resistance simply moved to Pittsburgh or Cleveland or Columbus. What remained was a population too poor to leave and a power structure too corrupt to reform. The mob didn't just run gambling. They owned the system. Prosecutors, judges, the sheriff, the county engineer, defense attorneys, a city law director, a former assistant U.S. attorney, and eventually a United States congressman. His name was Jim Trafficant, and his story is so strange that if you wrote it as fiction, no one would believe it. Chapter 5. The People's Crook. James Anthony Trafficant Jr. was born in 1941 inches, Youngstown, son of a working-class Catholic family. Played quarterback at the University of Pittsburgh alongside future NFL legend Mike Ditka. Got drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 20th round. Didn't make the cut. He came home. Worked as a drug counselor for 10 years. Then someone suggested he run for Mahoning County Sheriff. Here's where the story gets complicated in ways that are uniquely Youngstown. In the early 1980s, right when the steel mills were closing and families were losing everything, Trafficant, as sheriff, did something that made him a local legend. He refused to serve foreclosure papers on unemployed steelworkers, went to jail for 3 nights rather than evict families from their homes. The Mahoning Valley loved him for it. Here was a man who would go to jail for the little guy, who cared more about people than paperwork. In a city that felt abandoned by every corporation and every level of government, Trafficant was the one person who fought back. Then the FBI caught him taking money from mobsters. Trafficant defended himself in court. He wasn't a lawyer and argued he'd been conducting his own one-man sting operation. The jury believed him. He was acquitted, and the next year he ran for Congress and won. For 17 years, Jim Trafficant represented Youngstown in Washington. He wore denim suits. He sported a toupee that became a national joke. He ended every speech on the House floor with, "Beam me up, Mr. Speaker." He was loud, profane, and absolutely fearless in attacking the FBI, the IRS, and both political parties. And he won 8 elections, most of them by margins exceeding 2/3 of the vote. Meanwhile, back in Youngstown, Lenny Strollo, a made man in the Pittsburgh Mafia, was running the rackets. His operation included the All-American Club in Campbell, what the FBI would later describe as the largest illegal casino in the country. In 1996, the violence escalated. A rival mobster was targeted. Mahoning County Prosecutor Paul Gaines was shot in an assassination attempt that failed. Car bombings resumed. The FBI launched a 4-year investigation that would eventually crack the case wide open. In 1999, Strollo pleaded guilty and became a federal informant. His testimony was devastating. He described an entire county, not just a neighborhood, not just a political machine, but an entire governing structure controlled by organized crime. 46 people were indicted. 42 took plea bargains. Judges, prosecutors, the sheriff, and a congressman. The investigation reached Trafficant in 2000. He was indicted on 10 counts: bribery, racketeering, tax evasion. He defended himself again. This time, the jury didn't believe him. The House voted 420-1 to expel him. He ran for re-election from prison as an independent and got 15% of the vote. He served 7 years. Upon release, he ran again, got 16%. In 2014, a vintage tractor flipped over on Jim Trafficant at his family farm. He died 4 days later at a Youngstown hospital. He was 73. Karen Wurstel, a Youngstown grandmother, told NPR, "If he'd ever run for office again, I would have voted for him because I knew what kind of politics he was. He was honest with the people." That sentence tells you everything about what Youngstown had become. A city so thoroughly abandoned by legitimate power structures that a convicted felon felt more trustworthy than any institution, because at least Trafficant showed up. At least Trafficant remembered their names. By the time the FBI cleaned out the corruption, Youngstown had lost its steel, lost its mob, and lost half its population. What was left? Something no American city had ever tried before. Chapter 6: The Incredible Shrinking City. By 2002, Youngstown was a city of 80,000 people living in infrastructure designed for 170,000. Streets ran for blocks with no houses on either side. Water mains served neighborhoods where nobody lived. Streetlights illuminated empty lots. The East Side land, that had been cleared and prepped for post-war development with streets, water, sewer, signs, and utility poles, had never been built on. Nature was taking it back. Forests grew where subdivisions were supposed to be. Every other Rust Belt city that faced this problem did the same thing. They pretended it wasn't happening. They wrote growth-oriented master plans. They chased factories, offered tax breaks, built convention centers and sports stadiums and entertainment districts. They used the word revitalization like an incantation. Youngstown tried something different. In 2005, the city adopted the Youngstown 2010 Plan, the first comprehensive urban plan in American history, to formally accept that a city was shrinking and would continue to shrink. The plan was radical. Instead of trying to attract 170,000 people back to a city where 80,000 remained, Youngstown would right-size itself, demolish abandoned buildings, tear up unnecessary streets, convert empty neighborhoods into green space, offer the last remaining residents on depopulated blocks up to $50,000 to relocate, then raise everything. The American Planning Association gave it a National Planning Excellence Award. The New York Times called it one of the best ideas of the year. Delegations came from Flint, Dayton, Wheeling, and eventually from Europe and Japan. Youngstown became the test case for a new idea in urban planning: smart shrinkage. Hunter Morrison, director of the Center for Urban and Regional Studies at Youngstown State University, explained the philosophical shift. The American narrative always includes growth. No one wants to talk about shrinkage. That's too threatening to politicians, civic boosters, and chambers of commerce. More than 1,000 structures were demolished. Entire blocks were returned to grass. Community gardens appeared in vacant lots. A hike-bike trail was proposed to link the university to Mill Creek Park through rapidly depopulating streets. For a few years, it felt like Youngstown had found something. Not a solution, but a dignity. An honesty that other dying cities couldn't bring themselves to. Then the researchers from MIT showed up. Professors Brent Ryan and Shu-Ki Gao spent years studying what actually happened when Youngstown tried to implement its plan. Their findings were devastating. Most of the plan's downsizing recommendations were never implemented as zoning. Political resistance, property rights, financial limitations, and shifting administrations meant that the plan, however revolutionary in concept, remained largely aspirational. Former Mayor Jay Williams, the face of Youngstown 2010, was asked whether the plan was a success or a failure. His answer: "It is, to a certain extent, all of the above." But Youngstown wasn't done being a test case for American dreams and American disappointments. In 2017, a president showed up with a promise. Chapter 7: Don't Sell Your House. 20 miles northwest of downtown Youngstown, in the village of Lordstown, General Motors operated an assembly plant that had been running since 1966. The Chevy Vega, the Cavalier, the Cobalt, the Cruze 50 years of compact cars rolled off the line. For the Mahoning Valley, Lordstown was the last good-paying factory job, the last thread connecting the region to its industrial identity. In 2017, when President Trump came to nearby Youngstown, the plant was already under stress. Production had been cut from 3 shifts to 1. But Trump's message was unambiguous. "Don't move," he told the crowd. "Don't sell your house." Many workers took the words literally, according to David Green, who served as local UAW president at the time. 17 months later, GM announced that Lordstown Assembly would be idled. Workers were forced to transfer, some to Tennessee, some to Michigan, some to Texas. Families split. Houses that couldn't be sold were abandoned. The pattern that began with Black Monday in 1977 repeated itself with surgical precision in 2019. Green wrote letters to the White House pleading for help. They were ignored until he appeared on Fox News. Trump was watching. He fired off a tweet. Democrat UAW Local 1112 President David Green ought to get his act together and produce. Stop complaining and get the job done. Then came the pivot. In 2019, GM and South Korea's LG Energy Solution announced a joint venture called Ultium Cells. They would build a 2.8 million square foot electric vehicle battery plant 2 miles from the shuttered Lordstown Assembly Complex. The investment: $2.3 billion. The promise: over 1,000 jobs. By 2024, the plant was operational. 2,200 workers were producing battery cells for GM's electric vehicles. In December 2024, Ultium celebrated a milestone: 100 million cells produced. The same UAW Local 1112 that had represented Lordstown assembly workers organized the new plant. Wages nearly doubled from starting pay after a new contract. George Goronitis, a GM veteran who had helped organize the new plant, described the feeling. I teared up quite a few times having these conversations with my brothers and sisters that I used to work with here in Lordstown. And then the EV market slowed. In early 2025, Ultium cut 550 jobs and temporarily laid off 850 more. The reason? Slowing electric vehicle sales and an evolving regulatory environment. Guy Coviello, president of the Youngstown, Warren Regional Chamber, expressed a faith that felt almost hereditary. Electric vehicles are part of the world's future. Most of these jobs will come back. It's just a question of when, not if. The people of the Mahoning Valley had heard that kind of promise before. In 1977, they were told new industries would replace steel. In the 1990s, they were told the tech economy would lift all boats. In 2005, they were told smart shrinkage would make the city livable again. In 2017, they were told not to sell their houses. Every time someone said this time is different, it wasn't. So what do you say about a city that's been killed 3 times and is still here? Youngstown, Ohio, still exists. That sentence shouldn't need to be said, but it does. Because the forces that were supposed to destroy it, deindustrialization, organized crime, population collapse, political betrayal, did everything they could. The population is around 60,000 now. Youngstown State University anchors the downtown. New restaurants have opened. A performing arts center draws crowds. The 330 area code has become a tattoo that locals wear with defiant pride. But the deeper story of Youngstown isn't about resilience, a word that sounds good in grant applications but means almost nothing to a family that lost 3 generations of income. The deeper story is about what happens when an entire city is built on a single industry, and that industry is controlled by people who don't live there, don't invest there, and don't care what happens when they leave. The steel companies extracted the ore, the labor, and the best years of hundreds of thousands of lives. The mob extracted the paychecks, the politicians extracted the votes, and when there was nothing left to extract, they all moved on.